Hello, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the sessions today as much as I am. My name's Jamie Aitken, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to enable great performance. So maybe a little bit about me first. So I'm the VP of HR Transformation here at Betterworks, but I've been in HR for 25 years plus. And really, I've been called and pulled in most of my career in HR to change and transformation. If I look back in my career, in almost every case where I was, working either on a project, a big initiative with particular organizations across multiple industries and sectors, gosh, it was always about change, whether it was culture change, whether it was business transformation, or whether it was transformation within HR itself. And so my focus is to build out not only the strategy, but the plans to leverage technology in particular to deliver people-centric, value-based HR transformations. And, about 10 years ago, I was really pulled into specifically the HR tech space as opposed to being a practitioner, because I saw that a lot of transformation that was happening as it related to HR was happening with technology enabling some of that change. So I wanted to spend some time with you here today to talk specifically about some of the best practices I've seen as it relates to making that transformation, and what I've seen with organizations that I've been working with over the last 10 years specifically about what are the things you really must need to be getting right as you think about doing this type of transformation in your organization. But first, let's set the stage here and talk a little bit about why traditional performance management fails. And I don't know that this will be much of a surprise to any of us on the call, but it does require a little bit of grounding here, which is the notion that, let's face it, the performance review process is universally hated. Employees hate it, managers hate it, HR as well. I mean, nobody wakes up first thing in the morning and says, I'm so excited, I get to have my performance review today. And it also doesn't move the needle for us in terms of performance for an organization. There's a few reasons for that as well. You're setting up goals at the beginning of the year that are then locked in for that year. And then fast forward 12 months later, when you're having conversations about how you made progress to those goals, which probably, and if you think about the last, 2 years, a lot of the things that we've needed to shift and prioritize and reprioritize as everything was changing around us, they may not be relevant anymore. And certainly they're time consuming. They're time consuming for employees, for managers, and for HR. And worst of all, you could see recency bias as it relates to it. And I thought it was interesting. McKinsey cited a report that said that 22% of employees that were surveyed said that their performance appraisal process actually made them cry. So gosh, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Well, and it's not just about that they don't work. It's also that it's costing you money, not only in terms of time, but also if you think about the attrition that could be attributed to this really universally hated process, that has actually got a cost to it. Every person that votes with their feet and goes someplace else because they are not happy in their current situation, that's 1.6 times their salary. And if they don't walk with their feet or vote with their feet, but rather stay, but are demoralized or discouraged or disengaged, that also has a cost to your organization. But what if instead you could supercharge your workforce, develop talent, and coach managers, all while making talent processes more efficient? So before we go any further, like to get a bit of a sense here of where you are in your current performance management evolution. So are you looking at ways to modernize? Are you currently in a manual process? Are you using technology, but the process is heavy? Have you transformed, but the experience is not great? Or is your performance process perfect? I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Cast your vote here. Just 30 seconds more. We still have lots of votes coming in here. Okay, let's take a look at where we are all. Well, overwhelmingly looking for ways to modernize, currently a manual process at 41.5. And then also, we do use technology and the process is heavy at around 35%. And there's an experiential piece to it as well, that some of you have done the transformation, but the experience is not quite great yet. I love that there is somebody on our session now that says that their performance process is perfect. Congratulations. So here's the areas that I think are the must-dos and certainly key focus areas if you're really looking to make a sustainable, people-centric, valuable exercise and program for your organization. So here's sort of the 4 areas that I'm going to be walking through today. First is you need to have a business-driven approach to performance enablement. You need to design for delivering value to your employees and your organization. Critically, you need to support and sustain the change. And then also an element on how to measure success. So that's what this session is about. The first piece is around a business-driven approach to HR strategy, and I thought I'd share a story from my career. I was lucky enough to be given an opportunity to drive a global talent management team at a large organization, and my mandate was to fix what was broken. So I went on a listening tour, and I spent the first 30 days talking to a lot of folks from across the organization, asking the question, what do we need to fix in HR? Well, I got as many people as I asked, I got as many different opinions, and it was everything from our recruiting process is too slow, or our performance management is broken, etc. You can imagine. And then I had this aha moment when I remembered a dear colleague of mine from another role. She was in HR, and she always ended or interrupted HR meetings by saying, what does this mean for the business? How is this going to help support what the business is trying to achieve? And I think that is something I've carried certainly throughout my career since, but I'd forgotten about in that moment. So I actually went back and interviewed all those same business leaders again. And instead of asking, what do we need to fix in HR? I said, what are the business challenges that you are faced with right now that we could be supporting and helping you change? We just heard from Colgate on the previous panel, where we were talking about the notion that in order to really drive value for the organization, yes, it's important for HR, to get what they need to get done. But it's also important that we align ourselves with what the business is trying to achieve. And in the case of Colgate, they were really facing an interesting challenge in the marketplace because they had a lot of startups that were chipping away at their business because they were creating very, in garages across the country, there were people that were making their own toothpastes and, innovating around the Colgate brands. And so Colgate realized from a business perspective that they really needed to shift their culture into one of innovation. And so they used performance enablement to help have the employees be more consistently meeting on those innovation objectives. So there was a direct alignment between what the business was trying to achieve and what therefore HR needed to do. And I think that's probably one of the first critical elements when you're building out a transformation from an HR perspective is answer these questions. First of all, what is it that your company is focused on over the next few years? And then what implications does that have, therefore, for your workforce? And what do people need to stop, start, and continue to focus on? That will also help you then drive what the talent capabilities are needed and how HR needs to align their talent processes, including performance enablement, around driving that business outcome. So another poll for you. I love having the interaction here with the audience. So, and this is not exhaustive, but if you were to think about what is driving the need for transformation in your organization, what would you choose of these three: growth and innovation, employee and retention and attrition, or shifting organizational direction? And if you don't see your particular element here, that's okay. But I just want to get a sense what the organizations out here on this call, what you HR leaders are faced with right now. We'll just do another 30 seconds on this one. Lots of votes coming in here. Just the last 10 seconds here. Okay, let's see what is, okay, so employee retention and attrition, yes, that's certainly something that's at the top of organizations' minds right now, certainly with the Great Resignation. Growth and innovation at 33 and shifting organizational direction, all really interesting elements for us to keep in mind. But I love the fact that you're able to make a causal link to what your organization's large strategic imperatives are. Which brings me to this matrix here, which I think is a really interesting, very simple, but very interesting visual of what HR needs to be balancing all the time, which is the notion of supporting operational efficiency as well as strategic impact. So if you think about, if you think about what different elements we in HR need to focus on, yes, of course, operational efficiency and effectiveness, operational excellence in terms of making sure that our processes in HR are simple, not heavy, not bureaucratic, streamlined, well understood, well adopted. Absolutely, that is something we need to keep in mind. Particularly if we're looking at transformation, so that we don't design something that's not going to be adopted, but also this notion that it needs to have strategic impact. And of course, in a perfect world, we're all living here in the top right-hand quadrant. But if you think about it, and there won't be any kind of a poll here, but just imagine putting an X on where you think you are in terms of your matrix now and where you need to be. Ultimately, we're a blend of matching strategic excellence and operational excellence. And that is part of the balance that we need to make in HR. So let's talk now about design for delivering value. And it's certainly something that's come up throughout the day today as it relates to people-centric design. And again, we heard in the panel this notion that we really need to be including the people that we're ultimately building our future processes for. We need to include them in the design work. And I think, gone are the days where HR will sit in a conference room amongst themselves, design what they think is the perfect process, and then throw it over the fence to the rest of the organization, and then sit back stunned to think, why isn't anybody adopting this change? Like, what happened? Well, I think the idea is because we weren't including the very stakeholders that are going to actually hold all of the information we need to know about what's wrong, what's not working. So I'm a huge believer in the notion of applying design thinking to HR processes. And I purposely copied a sort of rudimentary graphic here of what design thinking is, because a lot of people in HR are starting to, I would say in the last 5 years, I've had a lot of engagements around design thinking in HR processes. But I think some are still intimidated by the notion that design thinking needs to be really heavy, intensive work. In fact, it's not. It's just having an acute focus on, in this case, an employee experience, but it could also, as importantly, be a manager experience around a particular, your performance enablement or performance management process. Let's find out first, let's get grounded empathetically in what the employee is feeling, what is motivating them, what is it that they are, how are they interacting with the various stages that we're putting them through in a particular process. Let's get really, really comfortable in the shoes of the people that we're designing for. And in fact, I think the most courageous of HR leaders are actually inviting those representatives from the various stakeholder groups that they're designing for into the room with them, so that you are not making any guesses about what the motivations and the pain points are, so that you truly have a reflection in your process of what that employee experience needs to be. And frankly, by including those people in your sessions, in the design work, they get to put their fingerprints on the future process state, something that is invaluable as it relates to adoption and feeling heard. So I think this is a particularly good skill and application to use. And frankly, the reason why the graphic is a little rough is because there is multiple ways that you can find out about design thinking just on a quick Google search. And of course, you can always reach out to me if you want more information on that. But I think this is something that's really advanced how we in HR can start truly designing people-centric processes. Highly recommend that. But as I mentioned, over the last 5 years, I've been doing an awful lot of these types of engagements. So I'll sort of give you what I think are the main elements from various empathy maps that I've been involved with. What employees are looking for is meaningful work. They are yearning to have clear expectations, transparency, and an aligned vision. We understand and know as HR people that one of the biggest contributors to employee engagement is when an employee can see how what they do contributes to a business and its progress over time. So that's certainly one element or theme that comes through. They want strong connections, meaningful conversations, trust, and the sense of being heard, and most tightly with their managers. So we need to ensure that that's something that we keep in mind when we're building out our performance enablement program. They want progress and feedback. So they want timely feedback. They thrive for recognition and fairness in the evaluation, and they want to feel invested in. They want to be coached. They want to feel like they can reach for a mentor and they can have some development and see their career growth over time in the organization. So that's what employees are looking for. What are managers looking for? Well, they want to build high-performing teams, of course, and you'll see that in some cases, thematically, some of the same things repeat over time. I think for people managers in particular, they want to be better supported. And certainly something that we're hearing again and again is that truly the people managers are going to be your ambassadors of change as you embark on this transformation. So making sure that they are well trained, that they feel like they have the tools available to them and that they're supported as they learn this new competency and strength around being a coach, being a mentor, and giving feedback is something I think is critical when we're looking at a key element to transformation, a successful transformation. They also want to have the ability to track progress, and they want access to data and tools for their team so that they can, have the visibility on perhaps where somebody is struggling and being able to support and coach those particular folks. What are HR leaders looking for? Well, certainly in the sessions I've had, what I'm hearing loud and clear is that they want insights and advanced analytics. They want to have a strategic view about the engagement in the organization, how the engagement from a performance enablement is affecting and improving productivity. And of course, they want to know how the adoption is of the change that they're doing. They also want to be less reactive and more focused on solving business challenges. So I like to call this take your seat at the table. I don't know about you, but in the last 20 plus years, I have not gone to an HR conference where there hasn't been at least one session called How to Get Your Seat at the Table. And my challenge to you is just to take your seat at the table. To echo Ryan, I think that this is the most exciting time I have seen in my career to be an HR innovator, and I hope you take that challenge. Certainly the fact that you are at this summit means to me that you are an HR innovator and are ready to take your seat at the table. Of course, they want the ability to track progress, and HR is also looking for sustainable transformation. They want to make sure that what they introduce into the organization has staying power and that people authentically are making the change, whether it's behavioral, whether it's process-wise, they're making the change to sustain the transformation because we're not doing the transformation for no reason. What smart business leaders are looking for, so we see again this notion on data. They're also interested, like people managers, on high-performing teams. But what we're starting to see more and more is this notion of a partnership with CHRO. And if you'll recall from Ryan's chat at the beginning, he was talking about the standing ovation with a room full of HR people that were applauding the CEO that said that he wants his CHRO to be challenging and directing and guiding. And certainly we're starting to see that with more and more business leaders. They also don't want to have a transformation that doesn't stick, particularly as they understand how the transformation is going to deliver results for the business. So that is, in a nutshell, what I would say thematically is coming out of about 5 years worth of design thinking workshops that I've been having with HR organizations. And I think it's a really good practice within your own organization to try this approach to really get to the heart of what it is that you need to be designing for. So let's talk a little bit about a really wildly successful transformation that happened at the University of Phoenix, again, grounded in a business imperative, which was that they had a change in the organization, and they realized, the new leadership coming in recognized that they needed to move the culture pretty fundamentally to one of transparency and trust. So what did they do? They blew up their annual performance reviews and replaced them with an employee-centric everyday performance development program. They shifted away from policing to enabling and prioritizing the needs of both managers and employees. And what they saw within 3 months was they saw participation in check-ins jump to almost 90%. And that same high participation rate sustained for 3 years and counting. And they also started seeing a high participation rates that led to employee engagement and productivity increases. So they were seeing a direct causal link to what they did when they designed their performance enablement program. And I think it's important, just even from a measure of success, that you think about how you're going to articulate those measures and be able to report on them and keep people accountable to them over time. So now let's talk about supporting and sustaining change. And this is a topic dear to my heart, because I think one of the things that I note a lot, particularly when technology is involved, is that we focus too much on, and of course it's important, but we focus too much on the implementation of the technology, and then we call it a win. And I think that's really where you're just getting started. So supporting and sustaining change is really about sustaining change over the long run and recognizing that you're not done when you go live, because change management doesn't just end when you launch, and it doesn't just end when you have your comm plan rolled out. Change is about sustaining new behaviors. It's about changing minds, redirecting motivations, giving space for people who are adopting over time and getting it wrong and maybe, a little bit challenged with the change. It's about holding people accountable to make sure that they understand that over time, their behaviors are, they're going to be held accountable for the new behaviors. So it needs to extend beyond the notion of communications. It needs to have a map that extends, I would argue, in any kind of transformation over the span of 1 year or 2 years, to make sure that those behaviors and competencies and processes are followed over time and mature over time. So ideally, though, you're first collecting input from relevant stakeholders, and I would definitely say that this is where design thinking comes into play. It's setting goals and metrics for a successful implementation. Absolutely. There's pieces to get ready as it relates to the change and the training that you're going to need around implementation. So that has merit here. But it's also about priming managers and employees for what's coming. What's it going to look like? What are you expecting me to do differently? And what are you going to be expecting me to do differently in, the first year, the second year, the third year? You want to be able to talk and showcase how the change will drive results. So why are we doing this in the first place? And you want to be able to use data to drive continuous improvement so that you're making sure that with the guideposts in your roadmap, you're able to assess, are you as far along as you thought you would be at this point? Or is there some things that you need to maybe circle back on and readjust? This is an important aspect as well to keep in mind, and I think sometimes we forget about it. Not all people change at the same pace. And so, yes, you'll have some early innovators, and I highly recommend getting them engaged very early so that they can be some of your change agents within the organization. But we also know that we have folks that are potentially late adopters. And so this is why it's important for you to be measuring your data over time to ensure that you have a plan to maybe circle back with the late adopters. Maybe there's more maybe there's more training that needs to happen. Maybe there's some other elements going on that you need to dig into so that you can have that adoption over time. But let's not assume that everybody is going to, even if they're included in the design, let's not assume everybody is going to immediately adopt the change. And just build your plan accordingly. This is for any of my fellow ProSci folks, is just a little bit of a switch on it. But the idea here is that you have, let's think about the change management related to the who does what. And if you're assuming your sponsors are okay just to stand up at the beginning of an all hands and say, this is the change we're doing, and that's it, that's not enough. Our change leaders, our change sponsors, our change champions, whatever nomenclature you want to use, they really are very important to articulating what it is we're doing and also getting organization excited about why we're doing it, and making sure that the employees have an opportunity to feedback on and make suggestions on that transformation. The knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, well, this is where it moves in more to a training, but also a people manager capability to help their employees fill in the knowledge and the ability that they have to make whatever changes we're asking them to do. And so in the case of performance enablement, we're talking about things like having conversations that might be difficult, having, critical conversations, having feedback sessions, how to do that, making sure that everybody is comfortable. We heard from the panel that Colgate uses avatars so that people can practice, and being a bit patient with people so that they can build this competency and skill over time, because it's not necessarily, depending of your culture, it's not necessarily something that's natural. And then, of course, in reinforcement, it's like what I was talking about with late adopters. The idea is that you're monitoring the change over time to make sure that your desired outcomes are actually activating. And in cases where they're not, taking the time, energy, and effort to circle back and uncover why. The change impact assessment is a tool I think is also very important and it really allows you to drill in to each of your stakeholder groups and define what the change actually is. I think in a lot of cases I've seen in the past, people assume with a technology that it's just really a system change that's happening and potentially a process. What I would encourage you to do is expand your view of what elements, what types of change are going to happen with a particular group, and do that work for all of the stakeholders that you are going to be impacting, so that you really have a good idea and assessment of where the biggest impacts are going to be. Again, I would recommend that you include those representatives from those stakeholder groups so that you're truly understanding and getting their voice heard in these particular conversations. Change readiness assessment then continues so that you can map over time where groups are getting stuck or how you're progressing with each of your stakeholder groups and tracking whether they're simply at an awareness level of the transformation or whether they have consistent engagement over time. This is really important for you to monitor, not just during the program before go live, but also in the months to come, months and years to come. And another element that's also important is to take the time to build out what I would say is a matrix around how you need to communicate and who you need to communicate with and what type of communication you need to do for each of your different stakeholder groups. In some cases, you're just going to need to keep them informed. In other cases, they're going to be the need for them to be highly collaborative and have them engaged in the change more actively is also important to know. So I think it's just a really critical for you to take the steps, do the work to make sure that you understand different stakeholders are going to have different needs and different requirements around the communication that you're going to do. And here is what I think is a bit problematic. So this is a classic steering committee setup that you would have on a typical transformation project. And IT would be involved in here as it relates to any technology. But typically you'll have an executive sponsor, you'll have your global process owners, you'll have a PMO, your change management leads, and regional and organizational sponsors. And this, where I think what's missing with this is that it's not built for sustainability. And I'll give you an example. So I had a steering committee when I was doing one very large global transformation. And of course, we built out something very similar to this. But what I realized quickly at the end of the change was that we had mapped out a transformation that was going to be taking place in terms of behaviors and attributes over a course of 2 years. But the steering committee assumed that their work would be done when we turned the go live on for the technology, not the case. So I very quickly cobbled additional structures for sustainability. And that also included, so it included the steering committee, but it also included the sustainability structure, which then involved both a separate governance group around at a strategic level, so the highest level in HR, the top 3 HR leaders were meeting every quarter to discuss the HR strategy and to make sure that what we were doing from a transformational perspective was keeping track with that. And if adjustments needed to be made, in fact, they were being made. We had a separate group that was at the more, I would say, organizational. This particular organization had 3 distinct divisions. So the folks leading the various processes and HR at those levels, we also met every 2 months to discuss and then feed up to that higher level governance group any challenges we had or any innovations we thought that we needed. And then, of course, down at the project level, we had a group that was specifically focused on the transformation project, how it was doing, how the technology was being consumed, and feeding up any new innovations that were coming that perhaps needed to be considered as it related to the innovation of our HR strategy. So there was a flow, but what we didn't do was leave it up to our super users, for example, to take the lead on an HR strategy, over after the project went live. And I think that's also really critical. So you need to be thinking through your sustainability structure so that your transformation stays relevant and stays at the minds of your top HR leaders. So how to measure success. So again, a bit of a poll here. What ways are you measuring success as it relates to your current performance management process? And there's a poll up here, so if you wouldn't mind selecting one of those elements. Is it simply, are we completing our forms? Are we getting the process done? Are you measuring the adoption of the process and the technology? Or are you actually relating it to the value of the business? I'll give about 30 seconds for you to cast your vote. A few more votes coming in. Okay, let's take a look. Value to the business, 47%. Completion of PMP forms, 25%, and then adoption of the process and technology, 28%. Excellent. And if you think about it, you see elements of each of those. So when you're thinking about your measures of success, if you think about completion of the process, if you think about feedback on the process, all of those elements will be living here. And when you start to measure the connection to the business, you're going to start seeing those here. And it's good to have a mix of both. I highly recommend that you have both operational measures of success. Are people adopting it? Are we getting good feedback? So sort of more of that qualitative, but also are we actually making the business needle move because of what we've done for performance enablement? Some of the key areas that we see as it relates to making that linkage between strategic business objectives and performance management are things like employee engagement and retention, leader and manager effectiveness, growth in talent development. We're seeing increases in productivity and performance, and of course, HR tech, user adoption, and ROI. And I'll just spend a minute on how we as a tech company in Betterworks measure our impact. But I would imagine you need to have a whole host of these so that you're measuring all of these elements, not just user adoption. So kudos to those who are doing that from the poll. So here's how we at Betterworks make work better. So I think we've talked about the fact that the idea here is that our performance enablement is about making sure that we have frequent check-ins between managers and direct reports with coaching templates, that we're giving feedback, both structured and unstructured, and building that muscle over time, that we have transparent and flexible goals, that we're making sure that we're getting some feedback from the employees and developing some action plans. As well, we have calibration. I think the most important piece to remember here on the side is that we do this in the flow of work. So if, for example, you're in your Gmail and you've just had a meeting with your boss, you can immediately request feedback without having to go into a different portal to ask for that feedback. You can do it in the flow of work, whether that's Teams, whether that's Gmail, whether that's Outlook, etc. As well, integrations with various goals, whether it's Salesforce, whether it's Jira. The idea within the flow of work is to remove the friction from having people get comfortable and confident that they can do this at the moment that it occurs to them, as opposed to waiting till the end of the year to record it in a completely different system. And of course, we sync with all core HRISs. And here's what we found, which is really interesting, is that the notion that if you blend goals, conversations, and feedback together, we're seeing an average increase of the productivity in terms of the progress of those goals increase by 30%. But also interestingly, and this is a study that we did with 2,500 respondents. Half of them were Betterworks users, half of them weren't, and these were just employees and people managers. But we saw that when we looked at the data, there was a 25% increase with employee NPS if they were using Betterworks. 3 times the amount of employee satisfaction, and a 44% increase in employees that said that they were willing to go above and beyond. So we think that this notion that you're blending conversations, feedback, good coaching for your people managers, and transparency around and clarity around what we're focusing on is really transformative in terms of performance enablement. So now I'm just going to go to the questions to see if we have anything in the chat here in the few minutes we have left. So the first question is, how often should performance management be undertaken, and how would the managers in HR be brought on board to leverage the outcomes being undertaken while taking into account the candidate's diverse journey? Okay, so I will answer the question. I believe performance management is not something that should happen twice a year. I think that is not the kind of connection that we need to be fostering in a people-centric workplace. I think to make work better, we need to have a lot more conversations and comfort around those conversations so that we can adjust our priorities over time, that we build trust between managers and employees so that managers feel very, very able as good coaches to help their employees feel like they know how they contribute to the organization. And employees need to understand that their bosses truly trust and have their back, so that we're moving from a place of control to one of enablement. Data seems to be, should you have a data foundation in place first before pushing these changes? I think you definitely should have some kind of a level set, but you can get that type of data around, I would say, if you have elements of employee engagement scores that you can take into play as it relates to, and any feedback that you have of your performance management process, those would be good data foundation points for you to start with. And then you can also track those scores over time to see if your transformation is actually taking hold and that you're getting good results from your team. Implementation is often by committee and has led to awful results. How do we do this right? Well, I would suggest that if you're bringing people into the conversations, I think the idea that you cannot just design this in a vacuum. You need to, in a people-centric design process, you need to be bringing your stakeholders into the room with you, because you cannot guess what pain points and motivations that particular group has. And I think it was Ryan who mentioned this notion of humility, and I think that's a very big part of it. The days where we build things without understanding the needs, motivations, and frustrations of the people we're building it for are over. We need to have a lot more humility around how we design these future state processes. I'm just quickly looking through if there's another question that we can do before we run out of time. Oh, here's how can a business case be made, pardon me, for performance management if you're dealing with less than enthusiasm from leadership? Well, I think that gets back to the slide I was talking about before, which is if you're coming to them just with an HR initiative, you're not necessarily going to build a business case that's going to get the attention of leadership. But however, if you start asking the questions of what business challenges they have and being able to draw the line between what your supporting by making the connection between what HR is doing and how it's going to impact those business results, there's where you get your ROI. But going in simply with, we need to change something in HR is not going to be enough for you to get the buy-in that you need to secure the effort, attention, resources that you need to do this type of transformation. So highly encourage you to do that. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this session. Thank you for your participation in this particular session. And I would tell you that next we have a really interesting session coming up. It's called In Pursuit of Personal Excellence with Doug Dennerlein and Luke List. And I think you'll really enjoy it. And please don't forget to make sure that you stay until the end of the session with our final closeout, because we have 2 Amazon $250 cards for you if you stay until the very end. So thank you very much.